So I thought, since it's Father's Day, I might want to start with a couple of jokes about fathers. And I went online to see if I could find a joke or two about Father's Day. And let me tell you, there is ample humor out there on the internet about jokes for Father's Day. And an interesting thing happened as I started looking at these jokes. I started noticing a little bit of anxiety rising up within me as I read these anecdotes and these stories about things that fathers had encountered their children doing. And I kind of had to wonder for a moment, oh my God, can I handle this? Am I ready for this? I mean, we'll give you an example here. So a little girl came into a room and asked her dad for another glass of water. And the father replied, "I've already given you 10 glasses of water." And the little girl looked back at him and said, "Well, I know, Daddy, but the bedroom's still on fire." I'm sitting here thinking, really? And then there were the sort of jokes that had kind of a theological bend to them, and I'm sure I'll get some of those too. And there was one that was talking about a father and a son walking on a beach, and the son notices that there was a seagull that had died, and so he asked his dad what had happened, and Dad explains death and how things go to God, and they go back to heaven, and the little boy looks at the seagull, and then looks back at his dad, and looked back at the seagull and said, "Yeah, but why did God throw this one back?" So I know I'm going to get these sorts of things are going to come up for me from time to time. And as funny as these stories were, and as I sit there and read them and kind of laugh, I'd have to stop and think, am I really ready for this? I mean, am I really ready to deal with those kinds of questions or those sorts of issues? And then I started thinking back on the things that I did as a child. Because now I know there's genetics involved, and so I'm thinking, well, okay, now these are the things I did. And I remembered one time I was maybe about 8 years old, and about the only time we would really get candles out was around Christmas. This was a long time before, we'd start lighting candles just to make a room smell better. So we'd get them out for Christmas, and I don't want to say I liked fire, but I was certainly fascinated by fire. And I would just like to watch the flame burn on them. I didn't like run around setting things on fire often. But this one time, I thought what I'd do is I'd just set a little piece of paper on fire, and I wanted to see it burn, and I'm going to blow it out. Well, I didn't realize that tissue paper goes up so very much faster than a regular piece of paper would. So I held this piece of tissue paper over the candle, and it just kind of and went up just in seconds, which startled little 8-year-old me, who turned and dropped it on the carpet. I did the best I could to put it out, but they do a really good job in our public school system of making sure that we know that when you hear a smoke detector go off, you get out of the house. So the smoke detector starts going off, and I just took off and ran out the front door, and then stood patiently on the front lawn waiting for whatever was going to happen next. So I'm thinking about these things, how am I going to deal with this when my little girl sets our carpet on fire? Turned out okay, I guess. We needed carpet anyway, and now we had an insurance claim. But, God is present even in these things. But as I reflected on this, I realized one thing. That, yes, certainly I could handle anything that came towards me. I knew that. But what I really realized was that it was more than just knowing that I could handle these things. That it was through faith that I knew I was going to be able to handle them. It was through faith not just in God, but faith in myself. It was faith in all aspects of my life that would allow me to find success, not just as a father, but in all aspects of my life, in everything that I would undertake. That I had to have the faith in me to trust in the power and presence of God. Charles Fillmore states it this way in his book, Christian Healing. He writes, "The idea that faith is something that has to do only with one's religious experience is incorrect. Faith is a faculty of mind that finds its most perfect expression in the spiritual nature. But in order to bring out one's whole character, it should be developed in all phases. That it is a power is self-evident. People who have faith in themselves achieve far more than those who do not believe in their own ability. And we call that sort of self-faith confidence. But confidence really is only a form of faith. And so I was thinking about what Mr. Fillmore said, and I know we're in America, so we may not all be aware, but the World Cup has started. And it's a really big deal all over the country, and I was watching it the other day, and there was a story about the Brazilian national team, and in particular, a story about their goalkeeper, Julio Cesar. Julio Cesar was one of the top goalkeepers in the world. He played for a club in Italy. He won the championship for that club. And he won the European Championship, the UEFA Champions League. They won that. And then he injured his finger, and he lost his starting position. You see, the goalie is probably the one person on that soccer team that really needs good use of his hands, because he's got to stop those shots from coming in. And so he lost his position. And so he was traded to another team. And it got to the point where this team wouldn't even let him train with them. He was almost relegated to training in a park with his son doing goalie drills with him. And he worked his way back up, and he became and is starting as the goalkeeper for the Brazilian team. And what I thought was interesting was they were interviewing the director of the competition for the Brazilian team. And they asked him about this goalie, and they said, how can you put your trust in somebody who's not playing on a regular basis? And the guy looked at him and he said, because our goalie has faith. He has faith in his innate ability. It doesn't really matter how much he's playing right now or not, because he knows he's good and he knows he's talented. And I realized the same is true for all of us. It's that self-confidence that we develop within us, that we know we can handle all that comes with us or comes at us. We know that there's no need to fear whether or not we're enough to handle the things that are coming our way, because we choose to have faith in ourselves. Not just in God, but we have faith in that innate Christ presence that's within us, and that element of God that we carry with us in every moment of every day. Remember what our second unity principle teaches us. You see, the first unity principle tells us that God is all good and everywhere present. But the second part of that, the second principle, tells us that that presence of God is located within each and every one of us. It says that we're spiritual beings, that we're created in God's image, and that the Spirit of God lives within each person. And so as we have faith in ourselves, we're able to have faith in God. We're placing our faith in the presence of God that's within us to provide us with all of the support that we need to handle whatever situation stands in front of us. You see, as Mr. Fillmore said, faith has so much more to do with our lives than simply our experience of religion. Faith becomes then a powerful tool. It's a tool that we can use to help us regardless of what's going on around us. And we can use it to help us achieve success in our lives, no matter what circumstance we're facing. And so how do we build that ability of faith within us? How is it that we can utilize and harness this power of faith to help guide us and direct us no matter what's coming our way? Well, here are a few things that you can do to help build that faith within you. Now, you heard earlier, you've heard me say, you heard Reverend Bob talk about how important prayer is to unity, and certainly prayer is an important part of building your faith. But the type of prayer that I wanted to talk about today, and the type of prayer that I'd like to encourage you to use to build your faith, is what's called affirmative prayer. You see, we can certainly do long, drawn-out meditations. We can do long prayers. We can call silent unity. But sometimes we find ourselves in moments where we just need that little boost of confidence, that kind of little boost of faith in ourselves to know that we're enough. And that's where affirmative prayer can come in. See, these are the same types of prayers that Myrtle used to heal herself from tuberculosis, saying, I know my body is whole and healthy. And so what I'd encourage you to do is to write a 30, 60-second speech or a sentence or two that highlight your strengths, highlight your own personal goals, and then recite that speech to yourself. Recite it in a mirror out loud. Now, I understand it may not always be comfortable to stand in front of a mirror and say I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. So say it in your head. If you're not in a place where you can say that out loud, speak it to yourself. And then let that feeling of self-confidence, that feeling of faith grow in you. You know, another thing you can do is just be grateful. I think a lot of times what happens is when we spend too much time focusing on the things we want, our mind starts creating reasons why we can't have those things. And we start thinking about, well, I'd like to go to graduate school. And then our mind starts going, yeah, but you didn't do so hot in your first go around at college. And you kind of struggle at math a little bit. Maybe you shouldn't do graduate school. Or we think, well, I'm going to start exercising. I'm going to work out. I'm going to get healthy. And your mind starts going, yeah, but you've never really stuck with it before. So why even try now? And what we know to be true is that we create the things that we experience. And so when we start thinking about all these reasons why we can't, what it ends up doing is leading us to dwell on our weaknesses, not on our strengths. So what I'd encourage you to do is to consciously begin focusing on the things that you're grateful for. Set aside time every day to mentally list everything in your life that you have to be grateful for. Recall your past successes, unique skills that you have, loving relationships that you're a part of, and the positive momentum you can see moving forward in your life. And you know what? I would bet you'll be amazed at just how much of a boost in confidence and faith that gives you. And then how much of a boost that gives you to take that next step forward for yourself. You know, and there's another thing you can do, and that's to focus on the contribution you're making to the world. Sometimes when we start thinking about the stuff we want, we get very caught up on this me attitude, and it's about what I want. And if we take time to remember that we're a vital part of our community, we're a vital part of our world, and we make a contribution that matters, well, that helps increase our faith and our self-confidence. We begin to feel important. And the more faith we have in ourselves, the more faith we have in God. And so if you're in a place right now where you're not making a contribution, you don't see a place where you're contributing to society, we have so many opportunities here at this community for you to step in and contribute and become a part of what this community is doing. It'll increase your faith in yourself. And when your faith increases in yourself, you contribute with a maximum efficiency. And then you become rewarded with more and more personal success. But you know, there's a final element to this. And it's an element that Mr. Fillmore talked about. You see, he reminded us that faith could be extended in our consciousness in every direction. Not just towards God, but in everything that we undertake. And that if we do that, we're capable of accomplishing wonderful things. So know that there is absolutely no element of your life that you cannot rely on faith in God within you in. There's nothing that God within you won't guide you through if you're willing to listen to that presence of God within. And so how do we do that? Well, the best way I have found to do that, to tune in to God and listen to what God is saying, is by listening to what I'm saying in the first place. And I mean, how many times do we get caught in the middle of our stuff and then we start thinking, well, of course, what else can I expect but the worst traffic in the world, hitting every red light, the worst drivers in the world in my way, the slowest checkout lane in the world? What else can I expect to go on this day but that? And what we know is true is we begin to create our own experiences. And so the more we think that, the more we begin to notice how things aren't going our way. You know, I had an experience on Friday where something very similar to this happened to me. See, I had an appointment at 11:30, and I had another one at 2:30. And I had just enough time between the two of them to run a few errands and get things done that I needed to have done by the 2:30 appointment. Now, it takes me about a half hour to get to where I needed to be at 11:30, so I left the house just a few minutes early to make it on time. And about halfway there, I see a sign on the highway that says right lane closed ahead, and then just nothing but brake lights. I think, naturally, this is what's going on the day. I actually have to, I can't be late. So I ended up being 20 minutes late for that appointment, so I missed the appointment. So he decided he could squeeze me in whenever, but that took another 20 minutes. And then I stopped on my way home to run my errand, and I'm sure I'm the only one that this has ever happened to, but I get into line with my 2 items in my hand, and I look over at the line over here, and people are just breezing right through it. 4 or 5 people are going through it, and I'm still standing in the same spot. And I start to think, well, maybe I'll go over to that line, but as soon as I do, then that one will slow down. I'm just going to stay right here. All the while thinking, why now? Of course this is happening to me. Why now? Why did I get stuck in this lane when I have so much else going on? It threw off my whole day. Like I said, we create our own experience. And so this was a time when I was creating my own experience. And instead of choosing to have faith in the presence of God in me to guide me to exactly where I needed to be, exactly when I needed to be there, I was creating a fair amount of anxiety and undue stress. You see, the truth of the matter is the situation was out of my control. I didn't close the lane on the highway. There was nothing I could do about that. I suppose I chose what lane to get in at the store, but I'm not the one checking them out. There's nothing I can do to speed that up. But what I could do was control how I responded to that situation. I realized that looking back on it. In the moment, I managed to get myself worked up into a fairly high state of anxiety and frustration. But the truth is, it wasn't about what was happening. It was about how I responded. And instead of becoming agitated, what I realized later was that I could have affirmed the truth of the matter. And the truth of the matter was that I was in the right place, I was at the right time, and I could have had faith in that moment that I was being supported by God, even in this, to get to where I needed to be safely, to get to do what I needed to do at the right time. You see, for me, it was about a lesson in faith. See, these little teachers pop up for us from time to time, and this was a lesson in faith. And it was a lesson that I needed to be aware of as I prepare to become a father myself. To remember that no matter what circumstance faces me, that I can respond from a place of faith. And that's true for all of us. No matter what circumstance faces us, no matter what comes up in our way, we have a choice to respond from a place of faith. To respond from a place of knowing that the Christ presence is within us, and that Christ presence can guide us and direct us no matter what it is we're facing. Even if your child just set the carpet on fire. Now, we've talked a little bit these past few weeks about the idea that the stories that happen around us, the stories we find in the Bible, the stories we find all around us in literature, can be used to help us identify where our life path is. And this is not any great secret I'm sharing with you today, that Peter, the disciple Peter, has been widely considered by Christians of all faiths as the representation for faith in the Bible. Peter's the disciple that Jesus says, on this rock I will build my church. And so there are all sorts of stories about faith and Peter that we can find in the Bible. But there's one in particular that kind of drew my attention today, and there's a very specific reason why. Now, usually this story is called Jesus Walks on Water. We're going to look at it today, though, as Peter walks on water, because that's the part I want to focus on. And this is found in Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by waves, was far from land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking towards them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come out to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water. and came towards Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, Peter became frightened and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" You see, the power for me in this story is that it shows that all of us will have moments in our lives when we'll doubt. All of us will have moments when we doubt our faith, when we doubt that presence of God that's within us. Every single one of us has those moments. But what the story shows us, and what I've learned from that story, is that we ourselves can overcome these moments and choose differently. We can choose to see God as present for us, that God is guiding us, even if the circumstances around us are a little bit frightening, or if they seem impossible. And the story reminds us to focus on the power and presence of God. You see, we have to have faith. And that, to me, is the true beauty that exists in this story. It's the reminder that even when our own personal faith fails us, that the Christ nature is still present, that it's still willing to provide support for us if we need it, if we're willing to listen to it, if we're willing to reach out our hand and take the hand. And essentially, that's what the writers of the Gospel of Matthew were telling us with this story. That was kind of the message they wanted to put out to the followers. It was this idea that no matter what the storm is that's raging on around you, you should always focus on God. Don't be like Peter. See, what they were saying is Peter in the moment gets drawn into the hecticness of the storm that's around him and forgets what he should be focused on, his faith, and starts to sink. Instead, they're telling us to be like the disciples in the boat and to focus on the presence of God, on the Christ nature. And this is how we should live our lives when we're guided by God. We live our lives focused on the power and presence of God. When we're called to step into a new adventure, when we're called to step into a new journey in life, I guess I didn't have enough adventure going through school. I decided to step into a new one as a father. We don't know what's coming for us. It's new. We don't know what's coming next. We don't know the next thing that's going to happen. But when we say yes to that new phase of life, we have to do so with faith. We have to do so with faith in ourselves and faith in the presence of God to guide us through those experiences. You see, we know that we're creative beings. We know that we create our experiences. We know that we create them through what we think, what we feel, and what we believe. But there's an important element of that creativity. And that important element that we cannot forget is the power of faith. The power of our faith in God within us to guide us and direct us and to create the world that we want to experience. See, that's the important element that we simply cannot forget. And then when we put our faith in God within us, as a direct result, we experience success in our lives. Now, Charles Fillmore had a lot to say about faith, but one of the definitions he wrote for faith said that faith is a deep inner knowing that which the things we are sought are already ours. He said that a close analysis shows that faith is the foundation of all that mankind does. So you see, it doesn't really matter what it is that you're working through or how you're moving through your journey at your life in this point. If you make faith in yourself and faith in your own Christ nature the foundation of what you do, you simply cannot help but build a self-confidence and a self-assuredness that you are more than enough to face whatever gets thrown your way. It's okay to forget from time to time, and like Peter, to get caught up in the storm that's around you. But what we can learn from Peter is that even when we do get caught up in that storm, even when we ourselves start to sink, that the Christ within is there and it's ready to extend its hand and help us out if we're open to grabbing it. Developing our faith in this presence and its unending support for us helps us to meet difficulties. It helps us to meet challenges in our life, and it helps us to meet them with a newfound confidence. It helps us to know that we're never alone, no matter what. We simply need to remember to have faith in the Christ to make our path clear. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to encourage you to always affirm the truth, that my faith is of God and my faith is in God. And know that no matter what the storm, what the fire, what the parenting mishap that approaches you, that God is guiding you, that God is supporting us. You simply got to have faith. God bless you.